All right, we are live. Hi, Normandi. I'm so
Hi.
happy to welcome you on my channel. I'm so excited, like see my smiling. So, Normandi Ellis, it's really a pleasure. It's an honor to have you here. You are my teacher, but I would like you to introduce yourself according to what is coming for you today.
Okay. So I'm Reverend Normandi Ellis. I have been in love with Egypt for probably my whole life. I've written many books on Egyptian things, starting with translating hieroglyphs, and hieroglyphs have always been one of my loves. Book of the Dead, so on. So what we're going to talk about today, I think, is the recent book called Hieroglyphic Words of Power, which really is a lot about metaphysical translation. There you go. And these are the cards that go with it.
Yes.
So, oh, yes, like that. Yes. And so we're going to talk about how the book came into being and what you can do with it.
Well, that's wonderful. So, how did this book came to life? It's an amazing book, actually. It's filled with wisdom. And just by the way, I cannot just pick two cards. I have to pick one card per month because every card has so much wisdom in it that I cannot pick more.
Yeah, it's really fun. There's 60 cards in the book and in the deck. And I limited it to 60 only because those were the 60 that when I go through the temples, people say, what does that mean? What does that mean? Those are the glyphs that people point to. And so I realized that the images symbolically speaking to us. So I thought, well, there's a lot more that I can do with this. They're not just sounds, they're not just indicators of something. They are a whole philosophy in and of themselves. And so they happen to be some of my favorite glyphs that I've chosen. So before I tell you about that, these are also the glyphs that I had a dream one time. And I was walking through Egypt in this desert track. There was this long road and there were flowers popping up on either side of it. And I had this coat on and the wind blew toward me and my coat flew open and the inside of my coat was entirely covered in hieroglyphs. And it was like, oh, I thought, oh, that's my Prospero's coat. That's my magic coat. So anyway, like I said,
That's beautiful.
I've been in love with them forever.
Actually, you remind me of one thing you said on one class I had with you about hieroglyphs, that they are not only images, but they represent different things. So you were telling us about the poetry, the sound at the same time. Maybe you can specify that for our viewers.
Right. Well, it's called Words of Power, hieroglyphic words of power. And the word for a word of power is Heka, Heka. And that's the name of a god, but it's also the whole concept of magic that stems from knowing how to use the words of power, the hieroglyphs, knowing how to pronounce them, knowing what each glyph symbolically means, knowing the sound of it. And so they defined Heka or magic as the proper words, the proper sequence, the proper intonation, and the proper intention. And if you could do that, you could create order. You could become co-creative with the gods. And so that's sort of been my mantra as I have lived my life, is that, I'm a writer. I am very devoted to the language, but I'm also devoted to the idea of how light springs from our lips. When Ptah created the world, he opened his mouth and light sprang from his lips. And so we, how shall I say, we sometimes give lip service to thoughts or things, but to really be conscious of thoughts or things every single moment is very much living an intentionally magical life, in my opinion.
Beautiful. That sounds so true for me. I feel it in my guts as you're speaking about. So for every card, this is really magical. For every card, there is magic. There is a lot of content. There is a lot of information also. How did you gather these informations? How did you bring all this together?
Well, of course, I had studied them for years, but I wanted to give a nod to the fact that what we know about numerology came from Egypt. And Pythagoras, he wanted to learn it. That's why he spent 30 years in Egypt before they agreed to teach him. It was just wandering around going, what does that mean? Sort of like we do on the trip. What does that mean? And they were like, lips are sealed. This is a mystery. And so anyway, he learned the power of numbers as well as the power of language. And of course, the numbers 1 through 9 have a certain sacred resonance. And so as I was giving sort of definitions of each glyph, I came up with 9 readings to, so that was like, okay, what are the 9? How does the number 7 work with the card for the heart? And that's all about spiritual love. How does the number 2 work with the card of the heart? That's often about interpersonal love,
So let me explain or summarize. So let's see this example for Anpu.
Anpu, okay.
Yes, you had gathered in a way 9 meanings or 9 layers for each card.
Right. And first I defined Anpu, who he is, what he does, why he's important. And then I did the 9 layers. Now, when I did that, I worked with a guide. I worked with my Egyptian guide, whose name is Moses. And so I went into meditation with Moses and also with Imhotep. And so I just took a walk and they wrote it down, and then when I came back, I would read what they had written. So a lot of it was channeled, in other words, a lot of it was channeled.
Exactly. And you are doing it through automatic writing, what we call automatic writing.
Yes, automatic writing.
That's amazing, because just this example, that the card that wanted to come for today for our meeting, I was reading things about, and it's about Anubis, but also you bring another being into this card. And I was reading this and I'm like, wow, this is like content that I have never seen somewhere, It's very precise. Given an example, oh my God, I mean, for every card, there is practically 3 to 4 pages filled with beautiful information.
Thank you.
And you were talking about, for example, because Anubis guarded the entrance of the underworld, the jackal appeared black and as inky night, with the grave, sometimes snarling and frightening. I mean, your way of writing, as if you bring us into a scene and we are imagining it. It's beautiful. But you talk also about Opuat. So there are like 2 beings, and I didn't see that.
Right. They guard Opuat. Actually is the name of that equipment that they used to go into the very small little airways inside the Great Pyramid to figure out what was behind those and to try to see behind the doors. So they really did try to open the ways with Upawat. And I think that's like his brother. It's one guards the east, one guards the west, just like there are 2 lions.
Yes. Yes.
A lot of things were happening in duplicate like that.
Yeah, and you continue. So there are like all these 9 layers and you give at the end some exercises or some reflect, like to reflect or to write or journal also.
Yes,
I find very deep also, and that is coming also from your background as a teacher and as a practitioner yourself, right?
Right. Yeah. I do a lot of writing. I love writing. It's obviously with words of power. It's my first love. And so, yes, having journal prompts in the back is sometimes really good. And one of the other things I want to say, it's not any coincidence that you would pick that particular card, since we are now at Sirius rising. I went out this morning and I looked up and I saw Sirius in the sky just as the sun was getting ready to come up. I'd gotten up a little bit before dawn, and I thought, yeah, Anubis is one of the Sirius stars, Sirius A, Sirius B, and Sirius C. So it's Isis and Anubis and her sister Nephthys. And that is something, those three stars together make it so bright that it's the brightest star in our vision, in our night sky. And its heliacal rising has been July the 19th historically. So we're right on time.
What do you think his message would be? And I would just say, see the hieroglyph, and we will talk about the images in a minute. So what would be his message?
Well, I certainly think that he is talking about when that star rose, there was always a new beginning. And as we are, as a culture around the world, coming out of the underworld at this time, just like that star Sirius is coming up out of the underworld and is resurrecting. He is showing us that we've lived through a very dark time in our history, and that we are coming out the other end. And what we have to remember is the lessons that we learned while we were in the dark.
Yeah.
Because he really is, the one who puts his nose to the ground and leads us through. He can smell his way through anything. And I think that, many of us would just think, oh, I'm throwing off my coats, I'm going to relax everything. No, we learned lessons. What did we learn in that darkness? We learned, for one, how to meditate, how to pray. A lot of us were, engaged in a lot of very strong prayer for healing. That's not something that's going to fall away.
Yeah.
That's part now of our renewed energies that are coming into the light.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. And there is one side also of him that came up earlier. I was reading that Isis, helped him to grow with compassion and without judgment. And that's really beautiful, because it's one thing that we are probably learning to deal with. So
Exactly.
Talking about the images, how did you get all these images? Because they are really images, right?
Yes, these were photographs that Amy Ossett Roan took from the walls as we were traveling about. And sometimes it was very hard to get the exact images. Yeah, there's another one. Oh, that's one of my favorite. That's the door, the entryway, the door with some little flames of fire around it. And it's a difficult passageway, but we've made it through. That's a good one to have with Anubis, because
actually these three came together. I didn't tell you.
Good.
Three came together, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna ask her about how to read three cards at the same time, because
that's
only
wonderful.
one at the same time.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we have Anubis, who is the guide through the underworld, who is the guide through the difficulties. He's the psychopomp as we move through the dark night of the soul, right? And so we have to go through that arit, which is the flame, which is the doorway that we think, I don't know if I want to go through there. I can't see what's on the other side of it. A lot of times that is almost like a doorway when you enter into the underworld. It's a little scary, and yet it's the mark of the hero's journey.
Yes.
Now, the card that you got in between that is called Sia, and that is the card of wisdom. It is the card of receiving an electrical charge that goes all the way from the top of your head down into the earth and back again. It moves through your spinal cord. And that is the image of reckoning. It's kind of like the awakening experience that Buddha had when he was sitting, under the Bodhi tree. It's that kind of knowledge. You're sudden like, okay, I get it now. So Anubis is going with us through this door, which is a little bit frightening, but it is something that is necessary for our growth. And in the process, not just on the other side, but in the process of quelching our fear, we gain an intense understanding of who we are and what our task is and what the divine wants us to do. So that's how I would read those three together.
That's beautiful. And also, like, from what you are saying is that there is, we consider that some decks are related to practical sides of life. Some are related to this psychology, some are related to spirituality, but this one is like highly spiritual, highly, it brings wisdom that makes us like higher our perception of reality and get that elder energy also, maybe Egyptian elderly or,
yes.
But did you in your own practice and your own life, did you sometimes get answers regarding to practical things for your life or for your
for these? Yes. For sure. A lot of times I use them as kind of like conversation cards. Mm-hmm. I will divide the deck into two. And so I will ask a question and pull a card. And then that's part of my conversation to the deity. And then the deity answers me back with another card. And so we continue this back and forth, I kind of liken it to a dialogue with your Ba, like that with your soul. It's a dialogue with your soul.
Wow, that's beautiful. And also there is something about astrology. I know that you are an astrologer, right? And you link to, did you use this deck in astrology, or do you link, because you talked about Sirius? Yes, I do.
And I like to do, there's a layout, there's a horoscope layout that I mentioned in the back, which is based on the ceiling at Dendera, which is a zodiacal ceiling, and it has the what we know of as Aries to Pisces, but they are Egyptian images. And so that is, it was an astrology temple. And so the fact that it was an astrology temple, and the fact that every single temple in Egypt is aligned to a star or to the sun at some particular moment in time, led me to think that, yes, this was astrological, what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I tried to make it as much as I could without saying, this god belongs to this sign. I wouldn't do that, but,
That's another thing that is interesting in the cards, and also in reading the book. There are different, as if there is not card for one god. There might be several in a way, because there are several facets or faces, and that's something that we tend to forget about the multiplicity of being.
Well, I think that's well said. I think that we should appreciate our gods being as complex and beautifully complex as we are. It shouldn't just be one thing. Mm-hmm. And so the more you deepen your understanding, who your mother was when you were a child was one thing. Who your mother is when you're an adult woman is different. Who your mother is when your mother is an older woman is much different. And so your relationship with her is going to change based upon the needs of the two of you, and also on the wisdom that's being exchanged. And so I think that that's what we're in that kind of relationship with our creators, the gods and goddesses.
That's beautiful. There is one thing that I want to explore with this deck, which I didn't yet, but there is like, you invite us through these hieroglyphs to draw them. And in the fact of drawing them, there is magic. And for those who like rituals and there is something about that. Are there other magical applications or useful maybe things that you would give us? I'm sure there are plenty, but
oh, sure. Well, one thing I know that I had one of my students get some very nice tattoos on her arm. And one of them was that she got this tattoo for when she does her ritual work, where she draws a protective circle, her magic wand finger, and it has a certain hieroglyph on it that ignites the circle of protection. And I'm like, oh, that's very cool.
Yeah, that's really nice. Yeah.
I often will use them when I am doing healing prayers, like when I have a 7-day candle or something that I'm lighting for someone. And I will, a lot of times I will put the Hotep image on it. So that's the peace and the healing. I will a lot of times put Sekhmet on there because she is such a powerful healer. There are various ones. Sometimes when someone needs, well, I'll tell you what I used to do. This is when my daughter was a child. She had a little trouble with this guy who was a bully down the street. And so I would take a papyrus and write hieroglyphic, protection for her, and dedicated it to Isis and Anubis, and put it in her backpack, and she would take it with her to school. It was just like, okay, mom's sending you a note. You have to figure it out what it means. Just don't throw it away, But it seemed to work, She seemed to gain more comfort in her new surroundings because she was in a new school. So yeah, and to stand up for herself. One time I actually had to go and get her because the bully decided to attack her and she fought back. I was like, oh, I put Sekhmet on that one today. Okay.
That's beautiful. I would love to talk with you another time about all your books, because all your books are filled with wisdom, and I really suggest that our viewers to look at them. But do you want to give us any one last message, one last and I have this question that I'm having on the background. What is your next project, Normandi?
Well, of course, going to Egypt is always on my next project list. But there are two that I'm working on kind of simultaneously. One of them is that I completed my Doctor of Divinity, which was something I always wanted to do. And I wrote a book on, they said, you can't do it on Egypt because you know too much about it. So I said, okay. So I wrote my PhD thesis on angels. And then that's been accepted as a book. And so I'm in the process of writing about the angels. And of course, I'm finding that they go back to Isis and Nephthys and Ma'at and all the winged beings. And it's like, okay. So so that's one of the projects. And the other is I'm putting together an anthology of practical engagement with the goddesses, all the different divinities. And it's going to be an anthology with work from my student and Osset Roan's students. And so their takes on these divine beings is going to be part of that book.
That would be wonderful. Any other classes also coming in? Because I follow your classes, and yes. Also Osset offers. She has a Patreon in which I am, and I'm following her classes also. She find really amazing. So yeah.
The next class that I'm going to do, I'm finally going to do the temple building classes, building the inner temple and building the outer temple.
Yes.
And that was something that I had wanted to do, but was not able to complete it. And it's probably going to be in the fall. I've got a few things that are coming up right now, but it looks like there'll be an in-person class and then there'll be an online version of it. So
yeah, amazing. And I will leave the link just below to explore the other creations and classes by Normandi. Thank you very much for coming today. And of course, I hope to see you again to talk about another topic.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
All right.